If no one has ever told you this before, I'll be the first person to do it now. While you're living your life normally working, paying bills, trying to get by the money of people who understand compound interest is multiplying on its own, quietly, every single day, and yours isn't. Not because you're lazy, not because you did something wrong, but simply because you haven't entered this game yet. And the problem is that this is one of those games where entering late comes at a high price, not in money right away, but in lost time. And lost time can't be recovered later. Maybe you think this has nothing to do with you. Maybe you think compound interest is for rich people, for investors, for those who already started ahead. But the uncomfortable truth is that it works against you in the same way it works in favor of those who use it. If you're not benefiting from it, you're being harmed by it. There is no neutrality here. Time is passing anyway. The only difference is who is using that time as an ally and who is letting it slip through their fingers. The cruelest part of all this is that in day-to-day life, you don't feel anything. It doesn't hurt. No alarm goes off. No notification pops up saying you've just lost thousands of dollars in the future. Life goes on as usual. The paycheck hits. The bills go out. You do what you can. And that's exactly why it's so easy to ignore. The effect of compound interest is invisible at first, and everything that's invisible seems harmless until it isn't. What almost no one explains to you is that compound interest isn't about making money fast. It's about completely changing the scale of your financial life. It's the reason why two people with similar incomes, similar backgrounds, and even similar struggles end up in completely different places years later. One keeps feeling like they're always chasing after things. The other starts to feel like something is finally working for them. And that difference doesn't start when the money gets big. It starts when the money is still too small to impress anyone. In the beginning, everything feels useless. You look at the amount you've saved or invested and think it changes nothing. It doesn't cover a big emergency. It doesn't solve a serious problem. It doesn't buy any freedom. And that's exactly where most people give up. They think they're wasting time. What they don't realize is that at this stage, the money isn't trying to change your life yet. It's trying to change the dynamics. It's trying to leave the state where everything depends exclusively on you. When you live only off your direct effort, every dollar carries emotional weight. Spending hurts. Making a mistake hurts even more. Any unexpected event becomes a threat, and that's exhausting. Mentally exhausting, emotionally exhausting, physically exhausting. Compound interest comes in to slowly ease that weight. Very slowly. At first, it barely helps. But over time, it starts to take on part of the work that used to be only yours. And when that happens, the feeling changes completely. Money starts to grow, not just because you put more in, but because it already exists. It starts generating other dollars without demanding more hours of your life. And that may sound obvious when someone says it, but feeling it in practice is a different story. That's the point where you realize the game isn't about how much you make today, but about how long you can keep money working without interrupting the process. The real power of compound interest is that it turns small, repeated decisions into huge consequences in the future. Not heroic decisions, not extreme sacrifices, ordinary decisions, almost boring ones. The problem is that they don't provide immediate emotional reward. And the human brain hates that. The brain likes fast returns. It likes to feel that it was worth it right now. And compound interest doesn't play that game. It plays the long game, even when you're still stuck dealing with short-term urgencies. And this is where one of the greatest financial injustices of the real world is born. Those who manage to start early, even with little, gain a massive advantage that doesn't seem fair, not because they're better, but because they were exposed to the effect of time for longer. While some people spend years just trying to survive. Others are accumulating something invisible that later becomes impossible to catch up to quickly. The most ironic part is that many people only understand this when it's already too late. When they look back and realize it wasn't the lack of money that held them back, but the lack of understanding. It wasn't low income. It was the delay in starting. And that regret is heavy because it comes with the feeling that life could have been less tight, less stressful, less suffocating, if someone had explained this simply back then. But if you're hearing this now, something important is still happening. Time is still passing. And from the moment you understand how this force works, you have the chance to stop fighting against it and start using it. Not in a miraculous way, not in a fast way, but in a consistent way. The money won't explode out of nowhere. but it will stop depending exclusively on you. And when that happens, something changes inside your head. Anxiety decreases, decisions become clearer. The future stops being just a distant threat and starts to feel like something you can build. All of this, not because you got rich, but because you entered a system where time is finally on your side, not against you. It still doesn't feel grand right now. It still feels abstract, and that's normal. This is just the beginning of the story. In the next steps, this will become more concrete, more real, more connected to simple choices you already make today without realizing the impact they have down the road. Because the power of compound interest isn't in a specific number. It's in the silent change of trajectory. And those who understand this early enough never look at money the same way again. There is a specific moment when your relationship with money changes, and almost no one notices when it happens. It's not when you get rich. It's not when the number gets big. It's when you realize that money has started to grow more because of time than because of your direct effort. That moment is usually quiet, almost anticlimactic, but it reorganizes everything inside. Before that, you feel like you're pushing life financially. After that, you feel like you're steering it, even if still slowly. Until you get there, the feeling is that nothing moves. You do the right thing and don't feel rewarded. You save a little, invest a little, and it seems irrelevant compared to the real problems of life. The car breaks down, the medical bill shows up, rent goes up, the cost of everything increases, and then that question arises that many people don't admit out loud. Why am I doing this if it doesn't change anything right now? That question isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign that you're still in the most thankless part of the process. What no one explains is that compound interest doesn't enter your life to solve the present. It enters to prevent the present from becoming a bigger disaster in the future. It doesn't work like a prize. It works like a change in trajectory. And trajectories only become clear when you look back, not when you're in the middle of the road. While you're moving forward, everything feels slow. Only later do you realize how far you've moved from where you started. In the beginning, money grows on a small base, so the effect seems ridiculous, almost offensive. You think you could have used that money to enjoy life more, relieve stress, buy something that would give you immediate pleasure. And that's exactly why so many people choose relief now. Not because they irresponsible, but because the human brain overvalues the present when the future feels too distant to be felt. But compound interest doesn't respect feelings. It respects consistency. Every period you keep money invested is like adding another invisible floor to a building that still looks too short to impress anyone. From the outside, nothing special can be seen. From the inside, all you feel is the effort of construction. But floor by floor, something is forming. And there comes a point where the growth of a single period starts to be greater than several periods from the beginning combined. That's when the power of multiplication really starts to show itself. Not as a magical leap, but as an inevitable acceleration. The money that barely moved before starts to pick up speed. It still doesn't support you. It still doesn't set you free, but it starts to ease the load. Small victories appear. You notice that the balance no longer goes back to zero. That one bad month doesn't erase everything. That one mistake doesn't destroy all the progress. And that completely changes the emotional weight of decisions. The most important thing to understand is that this multiplication doesn't happen because you got smarter. It happens because time started working in your favor. The same time that you used to pressure you, age you, demand quick results, now starts to build something beneath the surface. And when that happens, anxiety decreases. Not because life got easy, but because you stopped feeling cornered all the time. Meanwhile, those who never entered this process continue living a harsh, repetitive reality. Every month starts from zero. Every problem becomes a crisis. Every unexpected event becomes debt. There's no cushioning, no buffer, no margin. And the saddest part is that many of these people work just as hard or even harder than those who have already started to feel the effect of compound interest. The difference isn't effort. It's the system. Compound interest creates a system where money starts to accumulate in layers. Each new layer doesn't replace the previous one, it adds to it. And this continuous addition is what generates multiplication. It's not about doing something extraordinary. It's about stopping the interruption of the process. Every time you pull the money out too early, every time you start and stop, you break the logic that makes this effect work. And this happens to far more people than you might think. Many people start out excited, full of expectations, waiting to feel something quickly. When that doesn't happen, they conclude it's not worth it. What they don't realize is that compound interest demands something rare today: tolerance for boredom. It requires you to continue even when it doesn't feel rewarding. And that goes completely against everything we're encouraged to do. Everything today is immediate. Everything promises fast returns. And that's exactly why almost no one builds something that depends on time. The power of multiplication starts to become obvious when you realize that growth no longer depends only on how much you add, but on what's already been accumulated. That's when you understand that the money is no longer just sitting there waiting for your next decision. It's in motion. And that continuous motion creates a new filius sense of progress that doesn't need to be forced every month. This is the point where many people say they finally understood compound interest. Not because they learned the definition, but because they felt the psychological effect. They felt that something changed, that their financial life became less fragile, that the future stopped being just a distant problem and started to feel like a project in progress. But there's still a serious mistake that many people make even after understanding this, and that mistake can delay years of progress without them realizing it. A mistake that seems small, harmless, but slowly destroys the power of multiplication. And it's linked to how you react to fluctuations. 2 bad phases, 2 periods when it feels like everything is moving backward. That's what the next part will address. Because understanding the power of compound interest isn't just knowing how it grows. It's knowing how not to sabotage that growth with emotional decisions that seem logical in the moment but cost a lot in the long run. The mistake almost never happens when everything is going well. It happens in normal, common, quiet moments. That period when the market drops a bit, when the balance doesn't grow like before, when it feels like you went backward after so much effort, that's when the mind enters into conflict. Because emotionally, humans hate the feeling of loss more than they love the feeling of gain. Losing $100 hurts much more than gaining $100 feels good, and compound interest is brutally honest about that. It exposes those who can't handle seeing the number fluctuate. When the money is still small, any variation feels huge. One bad month feels like the end of everything. A temporary dip feels like proof that the decision was wrong, and it's at this exact point that many people interrupt the process. They pull the money out, change strategy, start over, stop investing, promise they'll come back later. But compound interest doesn't work with coming and going. It needs continuity. Every interruption breaks the chain. Every restart throws away accumulated time. The cruelest part is that those who do this usually think they're being prudent. They think they're avoiding a bigger mistake. They think they're protecting themselves, but in practice, they're doing exactly what prevents multiplication from happening, because real growth doesn't happen in good periods. It happens because you made it through the bad periods without destroying the system. It's continuous time, not perfect timing, that builds results. There's a very common illusion, especially among Americans, which is the idea of total control. The idea that if you do everything right, nothing will go wrong. But money doesn't work like that. Fluctuations are part of it. Slow phases are part of it. Moments of frustration are part of it. And those who truly understand compound interest don't try to eliminate these phases. They learn not to react to them emotionally. That's when money starts to multiply with less mental effort, because you stop making decisions all the time. You create a system and let it work. Money comes in, gets directed, invested, and you're no longer negotiating with yourself every month. This automation is one of the most powerful parts of the process because it removes ego, fear, and anxiety from the equation. And when emotions are out of the way, time can finally do its job. Multiplication happens when money stays in the same place long enough to generate more money on top of money that was already generated before. It sounds simple, but that's exactly what almost no one manages to maintain. People confuse movement with progress. They think changing all the time is a sign of intelligence, when most of the time it's just insecurity in disguise. And here comes a hard truth. Compound interest rewards consistency, not brilliance. You don't need to make amazing decisions. You need to avoid repeated bad decisions. You need to avoid small, constant, emotional self-sabotage. Every time you interrupt the process, you don't lose just money. You lose time. And time is the most expensive ingredient in this equation. What starts to happen for those who keep the system running is almost imperceptible day to day, but very clear when you look back a few years. The person realizes they no longer depend only on the next paycheck. That part of their financial life is disconnected from daily stress, that there's a base growing while life happens, and that base changes your posture toward work, consumption, and even career decisions. You start saying no more often. No to expenses that once seemed inevitable. No to pressures that pushed you into bad decisions. No to the constant sense of urgency. Because when something is growing in the background, you no longer feel like every choice defines everything. And that is freedom, even before any number becomes impressive. The power of compound interest becomes clear when you understand that it doesn't create wealth all at once. It creates stability first, then predictability, only then visible growth. Those who try to skip these steps usually break the process. Those who respect the order reap something much more solid. And here comes an important turning point. The more time passes, the less proportional effort is needed to see results. In the beginning, every dollar invested feels insignificant. After some time, every new dollar enters a system that's already in motion. It doesn't start from zero. It joins something that's already working. And that accelerates everything without you needing to accelerate your own life. This is the point where many people start to realize that money is no longer just a reflection of how much they worked, but of how long they knew how to wait. And waiting, in this context, isn't passivity. It's quiet discipline. It's resisting the temptation to interrupt something that hasn't yet shown its full potential. But there's still one fundamental thing missing, perhaps the most important of all. Compound interest doesn't just change the balance, it changes how you think about the future. It reduces fear, it increases clarity, it turns big financial problems into smaller, manageable ones. And this doesn't show up in any pretty simulation. This mental transformation is what takes someone from survival to building. And without it, even those who earn more continue living tight. Because income without a system is still just effort. And effort is exhausting. Systems sustain. That internal change is what the next part will go deeper into. Because when the mind changes, behavior changes. And when behavior changes, multiplication stops being theory and becomes a natural consequence. There's a kind of regret that doesn't appear all at once. It doesn't explode. It doesn't scream. It doesn't paralyze immediately. It grows slowly, the same way compound interest grows only in reverse. It's the regret of looking back and realizing the problem was never earning too little, never working too much, never a lack of effort. It was spending too much time without letting time work. This regret usually appears at very specific stages of life. When you start to feel your body tire more quickly. When you realize you don't want to trade hours for dollars for the rest of your life. When you start thinking about retirement not as a distant concept, but as something real with a date, with consequences. That's when many people realize that the greatest asset they had in life wasn't the money they earned, but the time they wasted without knowing it. And the cruelest part is that no one feels this in their early 20s. Actually, that stage time feels infinite. Mistakes feel reversible. Starting later always seems like a safe option, but compound interest doesn't work on that emotional logic. It's cold. It rewards those who started earlier, even imperfectly, far more than those who started perfectly. But late, in the American context, this feels even heavier because the narrative has always been about independence, figuring it out, working hard, and trusting that everything will work out. But working hard without a system doesn't create security. It creates exhaustion. And exhaustion doesn't sustain the future. Compound interest comes in exactly as an antidote to this cultural trap. It creates a quiet alternative to the endless cycle of work and consumption. When someone starts to feel the accumulated effect of time, even if still far from any financial freedom, something changes deeply. They stop seeing the future as a threat and start seeing it as a logical continuation of what's already being built. Anxiety decreases because there's coherence, there's direction, there's predictability. Not perfection, but predictability. And predictability is something that people who live constantly on the edge rarely have. Living paycheck to paycheck doesn't just exhaust your wallet. It exhausts your mind. You can never truly plan. You can never fully relax. You can never make decisions thinking beyond the next month. Compound interest slowly breaks this cycle, creating mental space that didn't exist before. That space is what allows you to say, I can wait. Wait to buy. Wait to change. Wait to decide, and waiting, in this context, isn't weakness. It's power. Because those who can't wait usually pay more, accept worse conditions, and make rushed decisions. Money that multiplies over time buys patience, and patience changes everything. What many people don't realize is that after a certain point, compound interest starts protecting you from yourself. It creates a structure that reduces the need for constant decisions. Fewer emotional choices, fewer impulses, fewer expensive mistakes. The system does the heavy lifting while you live your life, and this doesn't show up on any statement, but it shows up in behavior. You start to feel less urgency to prove something, less need to keep up with consumption standards that don't make sense, less comparison, because something is happening in the background that doesn't depend on anyone's approval. This internal shift is one of the greatest positive side effects of compound interest, and almost no one talks about it. Money gradually stops being a judge and becomes a tool. It no longer defines your worth. It no longer dictates every choice. It no longer controls your mood in the same way. And this happens long before any number becomes impressive. Freedom starts long before wealth. But this transformation only happens for those who can get through the hardest period of all. The period when you're doing everything right and still don't feel anything, when it feels like you're walking in the dark. When the temptation to quit shows up disguised as "I'll deal with this later," that later is where many people lose years without realizing it. Compound interest doesn't require perfection. It requires continuity. It requires you to keep going even when the excitement is gone. Even when the topic gets boring, even when no one is watching. Because the real effect only shows up for those who stay long enough to see it. And when it does show up, it doesn't come as a shock. It comes as a calm realization. Financial life has become less heavy. The future has become less threatening. Decisions have become simpler. Money has started working with you, not against you. And that doesn't happen by chance. It happens because, at your Achusami point, you decided to respect time. This story still needs to be closed the right way. It still needs to show how all of this translates into simple, practical, everyday choice is without magic formulas, without unrealistic promises. It needs to connect this logic to actions that any ordinary person can maintain, even with limited income, even with a busy life. Because the power of compound interest only truly materializes when it becomes a habit, not when it becomes theory. And that's exactly what comes next. The biggest mistake people make when they hear about compound interest is thinking they need to change everything at once. As if it were necessary to earn more, understand more, choose the perfect investment, wait for the ideal moment. This way of thinking paralyzes more people than the lack of money itself, because it turns something simple into something too heavy to start. And compound interest doesn't need a heroic beginning. It needs a possible beginning. In hell life, especially for those living in the United States, money leaves your account before you even see it. Taxes, healthcare, rent, loans, everything comes first. What's left seems too small to make a difference. And it's exactly this, too small, that deceives people. Because the power isn't in the initial size, it's in regularity over time. The system doesn't ask if you started big. It only asks if you kept going. When you create the habit of setting something aside before spending, even if it's uncomfortable at first, you're doing something that seems insignificant now, but completely changes the dynamics later on. Not because the amount is magical, but because you're creating a fixed route for the money. It has a destination before it even becomes temptation. And when that happens, you remove the decision from the emotional field and place it in the automatic one. This is a point many people will ignore. Compound interest works best when you stop thinking about it every day. The more you try to control every detail, the greater the chance of interfering with the process. Money needs time and calm to multiply, not constant surveillance. Those who check all the time usually react too much, and those who react too much tend to interrupt what shouldn't be interrupted. Life will continue to have problems. The market will drop at some point. The balance will fluctuate. None of that means the system stopped working. It just means it's alive. Those who understand this stop treating every fluctuation as a danger signal and start seeing it as part of the path. And that requires emotional maturity, not technical knowledge. As the years go by, something curious happens. The money you put in long ago starts to matter more than the new money you put in now. Not because you stopped contributing, but because time has already done a huge part of the work. That's the moment when many people finally understand what multiplication means. Not as theory, but as a real feeling. Growth stops depending exclusively on the present and starts carrying the past along with it. And that creates a deep shift in perspective. You start thinking less about how much can I save this month and more about how much time will this money have to grow. The focus moves from immediate sacrifice to continuous building. And this shift is liberating because it reduces guilt and increases clarity. Meanwhile, those who never entered this process keep trying to make up for lost time with bigger, riskier, more emotional decisions. They try to accelerate what only works with consistency. And the more they try to rush, the more they stumble. Compound interest punishes haste the same way it rewards patience. The most ironic part is that from the outside, those who are in the process don't seem to be doing anything extraordinary. They don't show off. They don't talk much. They don't promise miracles. They just keep going, and that keeping going month after month, year after year, creates a difference that seems absurd when it finally becomes visible. Not because the person is special, but because they respected time. And when that difference appears, it doesn't come with euphoria. It comes with calm. The person realizes they no longer need drastic moves. They don't need to bet everything on one decision. They don't need to live on the emotional edge. There's a base, and that base changes how you live, work, and decide. The power of compound interest, in the end, isn't about getting rich fast. It's about aging with less fear. About not waking up at 40, 50, or 60 with the feeling that time ran out and nothing was built. It's about looking back and realizing that even with mistakes, even with difficult phases, something was accumulating. And that's a feeling with no price. Not because it solves everything, but because it takes the constant weight of the future off your shoulders. Tomorrow stops being an abstract problem and becomes a logical continuation of what you've already done. This story still needs to be closed the right way. It needs to tie all of this into a clear, simple transformation that makes whoever is listening think, now I get what was missing. It needs to show that it's not too late, but it's also not infinite. That time is still passing, whether you use it or not. And it's exactly that final turn that comes next. There comes a moment when a person stops asking, how much will I make from this? And starts asking something much more important. What happens if I do nothing? That question changes everything because it takes the focus off hope and puts it on consequence. And compound interest is far more powerful when you understand the cost of ignoring it than when you dream about what it might give you. Doing nothing feels safe. It feels neutral. It feels like a choice without consequences. But over Chimi, it becomes clear that it isn't. Time doesn't stop because you're undecided. It doesn't wait for you to earn more. It doesn't respect a hard moment. It passes. And while it passes, it's being used by someone, either by you or against you. That's the part that hurts to accept. Many people only realize this when they start doing the math too late, when they try to make up for years of inertia with aggressive decisions, with more risk, with more stress, when money no longer has as much time to work, when each mistake weighs more, when the future starts to feel too tight to fix calmly. That tightness doesn't come out of nowhere. It's built slowly through the absence of continuity. Compound interest doesn't punish those who make mistakes. It punishes those who stop, those who start and quit, those who go in and out, those who treat something that depends on decades as if it were a test of a few months. And that's hard to accept because no one likes to admit they quit too early. It's more comfortable to say it didn't work, it wasn't the right time, the system doesn't work. But when you look closely, you realize the system worked exactly as promised. It just wasn't fed with enough time. And that creates a kind of silent, pained feeling that you were close to something important, but let go before crossing the hard part. The turning point happens when you understand that you don't need to feel motivated to continue. You just need to continue. Motivation comes and goes. Time doesn't. It only accumulates. Every month that passes working in your favor reduces the pressure of the next month. Every consistent year makes the next one less heavy. And that creates a domino effect that almost no one imagines at the beginning. Money starts to stop being an urgent problem and becomes a manageable problem. Then an occasional problem. Then a detail, not because you got rich, but because you built something that absorbs impact. And absorbing impact is what separates those who live in crisis from those who live in construction. The most powerful part of all this is that there's no big arrival moment. New fireworks. No specific day when you wake up and think, now it worked. What exists is a sequence of less stressful days, less desperate decisions, calmer conversations about money, a future that stops being so scary. And when you realize that, you understand that compound interest was never about money growing. It was always about fear shrinking, about time gaining space, about choices becoming lighter, about life stopping being a constant race against the clock. You don't need to start perfectly. You don't need to understand everything. You don't need to get it right all the time. You just need to respect time and stop fighting against it. You need to stop treating the future as something too distant to matter, because it's coming anyway. The difference is whether you'll meet it with something built toward, just with regret. If there's one quiet decision that separates those who live financially exhausted from those who live more financially at ease, it's this: allowing time to work. Not once, not when there's extra, but always, even when it seems small, even when it seems slow, even when no one is watching. The power of compound interest isn't in promises. It's in consequence. And consequence doesn't negotiate. It just happens. Now you understand why this changes everything. If you made it this far, it's because something clicked. Some piece that was loose finally fell into place. And that's exactly where change begins, not when money grows, but when the way of thinking changes. And if you do nothing with this, time will keep moving the same way. But if you do something even small, even imperfect, you enter a path that builds itself over the years. In the end, compound interest is too simple to impress and too powerful to ignore. And those who understand it never treat money the same way again. If this made sense to you, if at any point you thought, this is about me, hit the like button now. Subscribe to the channel. Because here we talk about money in a way no one else does, without fantasy and without comfortable lies. And if you made it to the end, comment the word asterisk asterisk, time asterisk asterisk, so I know you watched until the end and truly understood what was at stake here. Time will pass no matter what. The question is, will it work for you or against you?